Okay, I'll kick straight off. My paper today engages with an essay that will not be published until the new year. In that essay, I deal at some length with the way in which the cinema books explicitly explore the relationship between film and history, a topic that's not without controversy. I'll reiterate some of my claims before I finish, yet what I wanted to do today was to offer up some afterthoughts on that essay that I'd written. Or to put it more plainly, to reiterate my claims without too much fuss. In 1983 and 1985, Gilles Deleuze published two related volumes, Cinema 1 and Cinema 2. In these books, Deleuze's fundamental move is to assemble the philosophy of Henry Bergson's matter and memory with cinema. Bergson's text, published in 1896, acknowledges the world of matter and the world of spirit as different in kind, neither one being reducible to the other, yet they interact, they are inseparable. The world of matter acts upon the human and creates a sensory motor response. I see, I feel, I react. The world of spirit, or memory, but also of time, and also of thought, unlocks this sensory motor situation. So, how should I perceive? How should I feel? How should I react? Or even, can I react? Can I feel? Can I perceive? Crucial in this formulation is that the human is what Bergson calls a centre of indetermination, where matter and memory collide, and the collision of matter and memory is the very possibility of freedom, and there's a particular meaning of freedom there. Deleuze sees a correspondence in Bergson's distinction between the world of matter and the world of memory in the cinematic medium. On the one hand, some movies tend to organise themselves around a sensor-motory response. A character sees, feels, reacts, and his or her acts change the world of the film. Deleuze calls this cinema of the movement image, Deleuze calls this the cinema of the movement image and explores this in his first book, Cinema 1. On the other hand, his second cinema book, Cinema 2, obviously, explores how some films tend to problematise such an organisation. Characters cease to function, or function not as expected. The world is opaque, ambiguous and unrectifiable. In extreme cases, the film can even fail, deliberately of course, to extract a coherent character to centre upon. For Deleuze, this is not simply a question of narration in and of itself. Rather, narration is a secondary effect arising from the philosophy of the capture, selection and organisation of visual and audio images. Movement images attempt to present a world situation that is recognisable to the spectator and which can put coherent subjects to work to reorder that world. Time images, by contrast, attempt to defamiliarise the world and resist the formation of subjects, thus, one might say, allowing the spectator a certain freedom to think for themselves in the world as it is. From such broad coordinates, Deleuze produces two semiotics which explore in turn a vast taxonomy of movement images, 33 at the last count, I made it, and a not so vast taxonomy of time images. This Bergsonian model of cinema forms the first thesis of the transformation between the movement image and the time image. But there is another thesis. So, the second thesis. The second thesis of the transformation of the movement image into the time image does not contradict the categories of the first thesis. These remain intact. Rather, what happens is the broad division of the movement image and the time image is given historical dimensions. First, with regards to the history of cinema. Second, with regards to history in general. Cinema begins with what Tom Gunning has called the cinema of attractions. This is Deleuze's mapping, historical mapping of cinema history. From this, and there's nothing radical here, of course. From this early cinema, around 1915, the movement image emerges. Experiments with montage and the typage of framing and shots expand. Long shots, perception images, close-ups, affection images, and medium shots, action images, combine and narratives are created. The introduction of sound and colour consolidates the movement image, and this consolidation becomes more and more complex as movement image cinema develops, and we see it at its most complex today. The time image emerges due to a specific event, however, the Second World War. Deleuze writes, the timing is something like around 1948 Italy, around 1958 France, around 1968 Germany. What happened to the British New Wave, we ask ourselves? I don't know. Deleuze and the French must have missed that one. This timeline charts the emergence of Italian neorealism and the subsequent New Wave film movements. For Deleuze, what marks this emergence is an explosion of the action image which coheres the coordinates of the movement image. This delinkage is achieved through the reintroductions of aberrations which the movement image, from the very early days of cinema, has continually attempted to annul. So integrating soundtracks, naturalistic colour, invisible montage. This reintroduction of aberrations, though, is not a return to the cinema of attractions. Rather, in the delinkage of the movement image, these filmmakers discovered op signs and son signs, Deleuze calls them these, pure optical and sound situations. Deleuze asks the question, why is the Second World War taken as a break? His answer is that the post-war period has greatly increased the situations which we no longer know how to react to, in spaces we no longer know how to describe. Situations where we can no longer act, no longer be the hero or heroine, no longer resolve the chaos. In landscapes destroyed by war, cities laid waste by mortar fire, aerial assaults, and the A-bomb. In this thesis, this second thesis, movement image and time image have a direct relationship with history in general. The devastation of the human subject, its cities and landscapes, economies and infrastructures that resulted from the Second World War. So we also have a history of cinema in that as well. Yet Deleuze does not stop here. He goes on to explore how the movement image cinema is a history machine. Different forms of the movement image offer different forms of history: universal history, Marxist history, people's history, postmodern history. He hints at all of these and explores some in great detail in the first book. So on the one hand, we have the philosophical, ahistorical account. On the other, an historical account, general and specific with regards to cinema history. These two theses have caused commentators some real problems, and I want to work through these problems and maybe go on to propose a solution by exploring 4 Deleuzes. I suppose these constitutes the afterthoughts of the title of this paper. The first Deleuze. This first Deleuze might initially be called the Deleuze of the time image, though as we will see, this is not the case. This is the Deleuze we are very familiar with, especially in the Anglophone world, through the pages of many Deleuzian commentators. This is the Deleuze of the radical break between the philosophy of being and the philosophy of becoming, where being is a mistaken concept, does not account for anything, is essentially wrong. This is the Deleuze of the self-designated apolitical radicals who see themselves generally as leftists, without, of course, being Stalinist or Maoist, the patron saint of post-Bishop Berkeley immaterialism. This Deleuze, I maintain, does not really exist. Not that that's a massive problem. This first Deleuze is pure fantasy in the truly psychoanalytical sense. Hence we have a Deleuze of flows, lines of flight, becoming animal, woman, and various other concepts which are detached from his specific applications and become the fetish to disavow aspects of the second Deleuze. It's the second Deleuze. This is the Deleuze of the movement image, the cinema that engages with history. This is also the Deleuze of the second thesis of the transformation between the movement image and the time image, where the World War II causes a crisis in the cinema. This is the Deleuze that comes as a surprise to us, and shock to us even, so much so that we run away from him. For instance, with regards to the cinema books, there is and has been an attempt to pass over, avoid, or downplay Deleuze's claim that the Second World War can be seen as the founding division between the movement image and the time image. Indeed, this account of the emergence of the time image seems to be something of an embarrassment to some Deleuzians, if the way in which it has been consistently sidestepped is anything to go by. And Ronald Bogue, for instance, and Roderick, who've written the great cinematic engagements, which are fantastic books, of course, don't mention these founding division of the war. I think Bogue mentions it in about 2 lines, 100 pages in, and never talks about it again, and Roderick hints at it. His second Deleuze, by the way, is not an aberration. See, for his example, and I think here's the connection between all of our papers, his postscript to the Societies of Control, where he comments and expands upon Foucault's outline of disciplinary societies. In this essay, Deleuze, after Foucault, explicitly aligns the disciplinary society of the 18th and 19th century, a type of structure that which was preceded by societies of sovereignty and succeeded by, Deleuze's term, societies of control. In this essay, Deleuze writes, and here is the key, there is no need to ask which is the toughest regime, for it's within each of them that liberating and enslaving forces confront one another. Which leads us to the third Deleuze. This is the one we end up with if we follow the example of Bogue and Roderick, who are a lot more subtle than to opt for the first Deleuze. Their position is neatly exemplified in a short statement by Konstantin Verevis. Verevis reads Roman Polanski's Chinatown as, to quote, a perfectly realised Hollywood genre film, but one that exhibits an ability to exceed itself as a symbolic text and Oedipal drama. In other words, what we have here is the way in which the time image goes beyond the movement image and negates it. Deleuze sees the time image as being the logic of pure optical and auditory signs, which have lost their specificity as perception, affection, and action images. The philosophical position here can be clarified if we resituate the question of cinema in history. Giorgia Gilles, in Towards a Theory of History in Gilles Deleuze, writes that history is a philosophical problem for him. She situates this problem through reference to the coexistence of two antithetical sentences inside the Stoic theory of time. Any time is completely present, and only present exists. Gilles puts the distinction between these two times thus. We can say that chronos is the chronological succession made of encased presence, while aeon is the endless division into an infinite past and an infinite future. Deleuze uses these terms, aeon and chronos, throughout his writing, from Logic of Sense to his collaborations with Guattari, and as Gilles figures it, for Deleuze, the problem should not be posed as historical or anti-historical, but should be focused in the possibility of affirming and creating something new. This is a way of resolving, of course, these two positions, aeon and chronos. This resolution of the two antithetical positions of the Stoics with regards to time has its most clear enunciation in Nietzsche's On the Uses and Abuses of History for Life. For Nietzsche, living in history can result in oversaturation, which can cause a number of, quote, ill outcomes, ranging from a total inability to act to never-ending repetitious acts. The only way to avoid this is a balance. History must be balanced with the ahistorical. For Nietzsche, the ahistorical is exemplified by cattle grazing. He writes, they do not know what is meant by yesterday or today. They are fettered to the moment. The ahistorical may be the animal and be directed towards a pure forgetting, but without an element of this, history will simply ossify life. Reciprocally, living totally in the moment without a sense of the historical will condemn us to being animals. And here we return to the first ruse Deleuze, so to speak. It is this Stoic theory of time that can be seen ultimately to underpin Deleuze's division of the movement image and the time image. The movement image is time as chronos, the time image is time as aeon. Further, it would also seem that in the cinema books, Deleuze adopts the Giolian reading of the Nietzschean position with regards to history more clearly than anywhere else in his writing. This is the true Deleuze of the time image then. Yet we must exercise a little restraint here. This reading, the one foregrounded by Bogue, Roderick, Verevis, and inscribes a hierarchy. While these films which tend towards the time image are to be lauded, films which tend towards the movement image are obviously seen as problematic. This perspective can be seen as a consequence of the attempt to resolve the two antithetical models of time as presented by the Stoics through Nietzsche. To return to Gilles, to focus on the possibility of affirming and creating something new, rather than getting caught up in the antithetical positions of the historical and the ahistorical. Yet what if we do pose the problem in that way, as a problem of the historical and anti-historical? What if we do pose the problem of the second Deleuze, the one of the movement image, and the third Deleuze, the one of the time image? This is absolutely crucial point, the point Bogue and Roderick miss. This third Deleuze does not cancel out the second Deleuze. This does not negate the second Deleuze. Rather, the third Deleuze is the correlative of the second. What I mean here is the Deleuze of the time image does not cancel out the Deleuze of the movement image. These two things exist in parallel. Two quotes from Deleuze from both cinema books. It is not a matter of saying that the modern cinema of the time image is more valuable than the classical cinema of the movement image. We are talking only of masterpieces to which no hierarchy of value applies. To which no hierarchy of value applies. And it cannot be said that one is more important than the other, whether more beautiful or more profound. All that can be said is that the movement image does not give us the time image. Incredible, 600 pages. And you get to the end of it and you realise that, all he's saying is there are good and bad films. And I'm not going to talk about bad films. I'm only going to talk about good films. And some of them are movement images, some of them time images. You don't know what is a bad film after reading Deleuze, because he will not talk about them. Fantastic. This leads us to our fourth and final Deleuze. Slavoj Žižek, in his most recent book, In Defence of Lost Causes, foregrounds just this question. He writes, does Deleuze's conceptual structure not rely on two logics, on two conceptual oppositions which coexist in his work? He goes on in the usual Žižekian fashion. This insight seems so obvious that one is surprised it has not yet been generally perceived. I would have a look at this, the chapter that this Žižek engagement in. It's absolutely fantastic. It's Žižek at his best. Žižek is right. There are two logics. And nowhere is this confrontation of these two logics more apparent than in the cinema books, his two books. Yet at the same time, Žižek is utterly wrong to claim, and I quote, Deleuze himself was unaware of this deadlock in his work. Deleuze was intimately aware of this problem. Indeed, I believe that the cinema books are the place in which he examines this impasse between, if you like, the movement image against history, against the structures of time, and those structures that tear at it and pull it apart. For instance, in the cinema books, Deleuze migrates the terms chronos and aeon into chronos and chronos. Chronos with an H and chronos without a H. Why that migration and why the two terms are very confused? Because these two terms have been used interchangeably and mistakenly on many occasions throughout history. Why does Deleuze do this? Surely it is to indicate that aeon does not simply negate chronos. Rather, chronos and aeon, chronos and chronos, are inseparable, an irresolvable problem, an irresolvable paradox. And this is the crucial point. The cinema books do not simply negate the movement image through the time image. Rather, they keep alive the fundamental impasse in the two Stoic theories of time. That's it. Thank you.